Hey, Justin. Hey, Mike.
Morning.
That's still definitely my favorite picture of you, Justin, the flower beard. So, like,
My kid did this for me.
Hey, Justin. Good morning.
Hello, good morning.
I'm just going to grab a cup of coffee. I'll be right back.
Yeah, well, excited to have you at Cubecon. That's cool.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm excited to be there.
Have you gone before?
I've not, no.
Okay.
I've never been to Detroit.
Well, you're in for a treat.
And I have a buddy who's from Michigan. And I was telling him that I was excited. I was going to get to try some Detroit style pizza. And he's like, we have that here, right? We have that in Portland. But I
Yeah,
it's very good.
it's better in Detroit, probably.
Probably.
Hey, Steve, Pete,
Hiya.
Thomas. Hope you had a nice vacation, Thomas. Welcome back.
Yeah, sorry. It's a bit hard to catch up.
Oh, no
But
worries. No problem at all. Yeah.
But that's good to see that things are moving forward.
They certainly are. Yep. And hopefully have some good updates today. Cool. Just give it a minute or two. I think Dave volunteered to be scribe. We'll see if he's able to attend. And if not, we may need a quick volunteer. All right. Pete, thanks for that blog. Appreciate it.
You are welcome. I owe you some changes to an image, I think.
If you could, that would be great. If not, we could probably just get it in without it. But if you do have it accessible, that would be nice.
I was actually just looking to see if I can find it. I think I can find it.
Perfect. Thanks.
Yeah.
Cool. Looks like we have our scribe. Hey, Dave.
Yeah, I thought I couldn't dodge it anymore.
No, you're committed. Cool. Appreciate it. All right. Looks like we basically have enough to get started. So, no newcomers this time. If you could go ahead and add your name to the list of participants, I'll just go ahead and link it in this chat here. And maybe a little bit tricky as everyone's adding their names. And then do we have any volunteers for roles for next meeting? If not,
It's been a while since I've been the scribe. I can do it again.
cool. Thanks, Ted.
There's another role I can do that one.
Okay. Cool. Thanks. Yeah, I guess we can just get started. As always, just feel free to add anything to the agenda as it comes up, or just stop if you have any questions at any point. Quickly looking over it, looks like Sky as a topic related to the Go SDK.
Yeah, so
go ahead.
Last week, Steve made the point that while the language Go is commonly referred to as Golang, its official name is Go. And we've named the Golang SDK as such, and we should probably rename it to Go SDK. So that there's an issue in the SDK for this, and I've created a checklist of things we need to do to make this happen. And we're hoping to do this early next week. If anyone has any concerns about this, then we can either talk about it now or add it to the issue. I'll link it in the chat. But yeah, you should be able to just carry on using the old name. You just won't be able to get any updates. So you should rename it to the Go SDK when we do that to prevent that.
Feels like now is the time to do it, right? Because there's probably not really much adoption at this stage. So
Yeah, that was kind of our thought too, is like rip the Band-Aid off. We have a similar issue for the one we've called Node so far. And going through the process of JavaScript. So that will be the same concerns. There's already an issue kind of outlining that. And I think, yeah, ripping the Band-Aid off is probably a good analogy here, and just kind of dealing with kind of the impact that we'll have now versus, you know, after we kind of announce like a 1.0 release and stability, then obviously we're kind of stuck. So we'll get into that, I think, in a couple agenda points later in the session here today. But yeah, that was kind of one of the thoughts here, is just kind of dealing with some of these, you know, relatively major changes that we just want to kind of get out of the way if we think they're worth it. Of course, if there's a lot of pushback or we think it's not worth the effort, certainly, you know, bring it up, because it is a little impactful, and that's, yeah, I think now's a good time to do it, but we don't necessarily have to. Cool. All right. Sky, thanks for the update. And then the issue is linked in the notes now. So if anyone wants to check it out, you know, please do that. Cool. Todd, it looks like you have a couple items next.
Yeah, I'll share my screen really quickly. Well, in the wrong section. So there's a provider section in the doc site already. We've added a couple of things here. One is this checklist. The checklist is things that you should consider when doing your provider. A lot of them are really basic and really easy to implement, but also could be tricky gotchas. Like one of the ones, for instance, is flag keys might need to be transformed. That's something that a few providers need, because not all flag keys are valid. So that there's a whole bunch of like functional requirements here you should consider, and then non-functional things like the providers added to the doc. There's, you know, released in a certain way. So this is a good place to start for a to-do list if you're implementing a provider. And I also implemented these little copyist markdown things, so you can actually just paste them into GitHub Markdown, paste them as GitHub Markdown into an issue if you felt like it. There's also an FAQ that was added, so I'm hoping that SEO can catch some of these. Hopefully, if anybody Googled some of these, anybody who's written a provider or is familiar with that aspect of the spec, maybe just do a quick run through this and make sure it makes sense to you. And if you can think of something to add, please open a PR. That's really all there is for that one. There's also the test harness. So I have a couple links there. Justin recently opened an issue in the Java SDK that I've assigned to myself. And there's a link to the test harness repo. The test harness repo is really simple. It's just a set of Cucumber tests, a very small set right now that I'm working on expanding. And a Docker file for a test bed. The test bed is basically just flag D. It's just a container that runs flag D with a built-in set of flags that correspond to the Gherkin tests that I was mentioning. So we've talked about this before. I'm bringing it up again just because I'm actually, now that we have more SDKs close to complete, and now that we have flag D providers in a lot of languages, it means that we can actually go implement this. So I was going to implement Node in Java. Like I said, I'm working on expanding the Gherkin test suite right now, and I'll keep people up to date, and you'll see PRs for Node and Java soon. If anybody's interested in doing similarly in Go or .NET, feel free, or Python, whatever. But yeah, the requirement is that you need a flag D provider, obviously. But you can take a look in the GitHub actions in the Node sample, and in the PR I'll open for Java. It's really simple. You can just basically run a container as a service in the GitHub action, and then run an integration test suite. So that's the idea. I think that's all I need to mention there. So a lot of work still to be done there, but I'm hoping that basically this week and next, definitely before the next time we meet, I'll have that done in at least 2 SDKs. And that's it for that topic. I see James is next.
Cool. Yeah, so just a little bit of news regarding this OFET for the flag events. So we had a couple changes to the Node SDK, or will be the JavaScript SDK for flag D, to allow it to work in web environments. So we've done a little bit of rework. So it's going to be working with the Connect build API. So different protocol, a little bit more lightweight for web development. But I put together a proof of concept for the flag eventing. So at the moment, you can create 2 events. One just says provider ready. The other is for a configuration change. And that allows us to have, immediate updates on like a front end environment when a flag is changed in the backend. I've got a quick demo for you, which will 90% break, but I'll give it a go anyway. So if we go on here, so I've got a lovely website put together. I just reload the page to make sure the connection's there. We've got a flag loaded currently to do the background color for this banner that serves no purpose. Currently it's set with the flag value here in this flag D instance of not yellow. I'll just come in here and update it to yellow. And the subscription means that immediately we get that change seen in the front end. And just down here you can see there's a little code snippet of how that is being implemented. So you listen to the configuration change event, and you can just pass in a listener for it, and these will be propagated through all clients. But yeah, just to demo it. So in Todd's OFEP, there were 2 examples. This is the second one. It may be that we should do the first one. So yeah, if you've got any feedback, that'd be appreciated in the OFEP.
Alex,
Can I
you're
ask a
muted.
question? Oh, sorry, my bad. This is really interesting to me because the thing that I really struggle to understand is when would you be building a React site locally in Node.js and then wanting to use a Linux binary to control the flags? Like, I'm just trying to understand the worlds that this is combining. Wouldn't you want to have some sort of like Node or like, JavaScript native version of flag D?
I think, keeping all your eggs in one basket might be one argument for it. If you've got a backend with flag evaluations happening in flag D, I personally wouldn't want to then introduce another flag provider for a second set of flags for the front end, especially if you need things to link up between the 2. I can't give a good example for it, right? But there certainly will be some.
I guess, and I don't like being a stick in the mud. But the Unix design philosophy was behind flag D, right? Do one thing well, like cat. Cat doesn't do more than one thing. That was the same idea with flag D. I'm only a little bit nervous about bringing in additional capabilities, like someone mentioned, putting in authorization capabilities in, putting in middleware capabilities, which I think are great ideas for a standalone program that does that as a web service. But again, I was trying to think how you'd work. So you're locally developing the flag D in the back end, and the idea is that somebody is going to write a deployment that flag D runs in, and that would be the back end bit of the Node API talking to flag D, and then it'd be a front end component hosted somewhere else, right? And you connect through the load balancer. Like, what's the architecture?
Yeah, I think it's basically that. So gRPC or the connect protocol works on HTTP. So you could the architecture I would think you'd want for this would be distinct from like something that the OpenFeature operator, for instance, would deploy for you. So you'd just deploy a standalone flag D as a container somewhere in your infrastructure as a pod. You'd expose that via a cloud load balancer. Or your own load balancer in your infrastructure, however you want to do that. And it's going to expose that externally. So this is an externally available service that exposes a flag D instance that you've deployed specifically for client-facing flags. Then the flag D web client, which is similar to the flag D JavaScript provider, except not using gRPC, it uses HTTP via connect, is then talking to that instance through that load balancer probably. I mean, you don't really even need the load balancer. You could hypothetically like just expose that flag D somewhere in your infrastructure, put SSL in it. I don't think you'd want to do that, but you could. But that's the idea. And I think it's just distinct from, it's a little bit different from like the way, say we're doing it with OpenFeature operator or something like that. And there's more manual infrastructural steps for sure, but that's the architecture I had in my head.
Okay. Makes sense. I do think it's worth actually talking about whether that's hypothetically a use case anyone would actually go with, because there's no authorization on the endpoint. There's also no TLS termination. HTTP2 is not supported on Big 5 or Big IP in many places. So I'm just trying to think of the hypotheticals here that stop this from actually working. But it makes sense in my head now. You've mentioned, I never thought that this was going to be flag D standalone in a container. So that makes a lot more sense. I understand it.
Yeah, and I think probably it would make sense to have a standalone sync on this topic. So the one reason I wanted to show it here was just to show like the eventing API, because that's part of like the overall spec. But I think like a dedicated section on like the flag D implementation probably makes sense. So we can talk through in the flag D channel or just in the Slack channel and try to get something on the calendar. But yeah, I think really it was just kind of showing off maybe some of the client side efforts and the eventing parts of the spec here. And if we have time, maybe we could circle back even at the end to discuss it in more detail. But I think most people on the call aren't totally up to speed on flag D itself. So we can probably move on to other topics. Let me look here. Todd, did you have anything else next? Or no, it's me actually. Okay. So I was talking to the OTEL team about what we can do potentially about stabilizing the spec itself. And one of the things I had talked about was figuring out different stability levels or status levels. It seemed to me that OpenTelemetry was kind of missing a status, and turns out they kind of are, but they technically have it. They just don't show it in their status table. Geez, excuse me. Sorry about that. Basically, they have a feature freeze status level, and I think that actually makes sense. It's a lot, I think, in line with what we're looking for. And so I'm working on defining what a feature freeze would look like in our status doc. And then I would propose that in the next maybe week or so, we define which ones could be basically good candidates for having feature be frozen, essentially. It doesn't mean that we couldn't add, new features ever. It just means that until we basically lock down like our stability or mark it as stable, we would basically shelf any kind of new features that aren't, breaking, emergency fixes or something that we have to put into place. So I think in order to basically hit some of our goals of having some stability release in October, we do need to implement some kind of freeze on the spec itself. And so I'm kind of working through that right now, and feedback would be great. I'll put the pull request in the Slack channel once it's available, but it is going to be pretty heavily inspired by what OpenTelemetry does in terms of their stability levels. And I think they have a lot of the same problems or challenges that we have. So I think it's a pretty good reference point. And I don't know, I can open it up to if there's any feedback on that proposal, but. Okay. So yeah, look for that in the future. I think that is, I moved that in front of Todd's point actually, because I think the freezing of the spec is an important part in order to have a release candidate SDK. And so that's why I'll hand it over to Todd now to talk about that.
Yeah, so thanks. As we kind of get closer to a Cubecon, that was kind of one of the dates that was important to the project. What we'd hope to do is be able to move some SDKs into a release candidate status. So I've kind of been throwing those words out there a little bit casually recently, but I'd like to talk about specifically probably the 4 SDKs I have listed there. I've been implementing providers, helping implement providers, as well as doing a few different POCs. And it seems to me that like what we have in most SDKs at this point is fairly feature complete. So as far as like the goals and the visions that I think are laid out in the spec implicitly, and use cases that I've seen across those various providers, I think we're pretty much there. So I'd like to get to a spot where we're comfortable saying, either this build or, a next few builds from here, like maybe there's some key issues in particular SDK people are passionate about. But I'd like to be able to identify like, yeah, we're getting close to release candidate. Let's focus on fixing bugs. Let's focus on stability and making sure that there's no key use cases we're missing, because I'd like to be able to feel comfortable heading towards a 1.0 release. So yeah, just putting that out there for anyone who agrees, disagrees.
I like that idea. I have concerns that we're not adequately thinking about mobile use cases. I would love it if mobile people used our SDK, especially the interfaces. And I think that there are probably some issues that they have with it. And I've filed a ticket from some internal Android people who were looking at the spec. Feels like something that we should nail down before we land 1.0.
Okay.
I think it's like I would say if we're talking mobile, then I'd rephrase it as just kind of like client side. You know what I mean? Because that's probably the biggest like use case is probably more client side JavaScript than it is Android and iOS. Not saying that the mobile use case isn't important, but I think it's more broadly like supporting client side. I'm not sure I agree necessarily that we need to do it before 1.0, but I think if we did do it, then I think it should be kind of client side more generally, not just like iOS or Android.
I think there are some key differences between the two, but sure.
Yeah. I mean, I guess you've got to like think a lot more about the offline case for
offline case. Also, like they deal with things like UI threads and like non-blocking calls versus blocking calls being like super critical.
Yeah,
yeah, I mean, so part of that would be one of the things we were thinking about in terms of like stability. So like once we kind of marked it as the spec was stable, if we still kind of leveraged what OpenTelemetry did, they have different meanings to what stable means. And the way I'm kind of thinking about it would be like the developer facing interfaces would effectively like have a, be stable. We would not introduce breaking changes. But we could still add, we'd still have the flexibility within reason to update like the provider interfaces and things like that. Those are easier for a user. Basically, if you upgrade OpenFeature, then you just upgrade to the appropriate like provider, that supports the new interface. So it's it's a lower barrier. So, I mean, I guess part of it, if we're thinking about some of the requirements for mobile, does that change the developer facing interfaces? And if it does, could we potentially add like explicit exceptions for client or mobile in the spec to maybe potentially work around those use cases? I don't know.
I think it wouldn't be too shocking to me if we discovered that we did actually need to, maybe not need to change the developer facing spec to support client side, or if we realize that it's not really usable without some kind of additions to the spec. I have a feeling. I mean, it's a very vague thing to say, but
the basics work. So we've tested that at client side, but yeah, of course, like it hasn't really been battle hardened at all. Looking at existing feature flag vendor SDKs, like they're relatively similar to server side, at least in terms of like their interfaces. But I suppose that we have representation from a number of flag vendors. If they have any specific areas that we should consider, I guess definitely let us know. We could also have the ability to potentially add to the spec specifically for mobile use case or client side use cases and kind of extend the spec for that area, since we haven't really explored it. Maybe that could even be part of our stability guarantee, is that it's for server side or something at the moment.
Yeah, because there is one use case that you can see in some client SDKs, like when you retrieve all flags at once, just to have like a local copy. And this is not something we are dealing with for now. So I already see some use cases where we can expect some changes in the spec if we want to implement such thing. I'm not sure we want, but this is some things that are happening in a front-end one.
Yeah,
and
we could have conditions in the spec that some features like that are only required for mobile implementations, but that does then create like divergence between the interfaces for server and interfaces per client, and we need to think about whether or not we even want to do that. At the risk of going over here, I mean, Mike, I'll defer to you, but at the risk of going over here, I'm wondering if the best takeaway is to schedule another meeting where people would bring up specific concerns, and hopefully the output of the meeting would be issues, like specific research issues with specific assignees, and then we could do those tasks and come back at a later meeting. I think that might be the most productive way to do this. Okay, good, I'm seeing some thumbs up. So I can work on scheduling a meeting and creating a document or something like that where people could talk about what kind of concerns they want to bring. But again, I hate meetings for the sake of meetings, so hopefully we can leave that meeting with issues, specific research issues.
I'm also fine
So-
with issues.
Yeah, or yeah, and that's fine too. If we don't need a meeting, if we can just do this asynchronously, I'm down with that as well. But I think we need to get a list of issues basically.
Yeah.
I'll talk with some mobile folks internally, and I've already talked to Android. I'm gonna talk to iOS and see what they have to say.
Yeah, that would be great. And from my perspective, that's an area that I'm pretty unfamiliar with, honestly. So it's not something that I can real competently talk about, I guess. So yeah, your input there would be, really valuable. So. Well, Todd, it looks like you have another item too.
Yeah, this one should be quick. So we've been using release please in a couple repos. I really like release please, but I'm not trying to force it on anyone. If you don't like release please, you don't want to use it, that's totally fine. But I think what we do need to kind of agree on, I think, is how we're actually doing releases. One of the issues that I've seen is that everyone is below 0 right now, and there's been a little bit of inconsistency with the release semantics. I would like to agree that while we're below 1, we kind of do the shift of semantic meaning of all the numbers. So a breaking change is a minor change now. So if you go from 0.1 to 0.2, you're implying that there's a breaking change. I think that's helpful. I mean, please, anybody who doesn't like that idea, let me know. But I think it might be a good thing to do. I also think that we need to make sure that within our SDKs, the release process is transparent and democratic where applicable. Release please really helps with that, because the release process is made into a PR. You can see the version numbers that are going to change. You can see the generated change log. The bot actually opens up a PR and then somebody merges it. So it's very democratic. Again, we don't have to do release please in any particular repo, but I think it solves a lot of those problems. Yeah, let me know if you disagree with any of those things or you want to talk about them further, but that's my take. Specifically, okay. Does anybody have a problem with the semantic versioning caveat I was highlighting? Does that make sense to everyone? Okay.
It makes sense. Some of the automated tools may try and still force a first number increase, because if you get like the exclamation mark or breaking change in a commit message, something's go, I'll automatically release it as bumping up the next major version. But certainly that's something we can easily get past.
Yeah, and specifically release please has an option for that. But yeah, I think point taken there. That may be a challenge for some tooling. Hopefully it's not something we have to worry about too much longer, but yeah.
Yeah, and it is probably worth mentioning that we have like example configurations in a lot of different languages for release please too. And I suppose at least Todd and I have kind of built up some expertise with the tool recently. So if you need help and interested in using it, we have no affiliation with it. It just works well. So yeah, perfect. One other one, it doesn't have who added it here, but it just says social media issue. I'm hoping they're talking about the issue created to track social media postings, not that they have an issue with social media, but I'll link it in there. Basically, there's in the community repo, there's an issue. Someone from Dynatrace actually reviews it every couple weeks, and then we'll look through the issues there, and then we can schedule some like tweets and things like that around there. So if there's anything particular, we'll add it in there. I think it's good, if we add blog posts or release providers, anything like that could be scheduled. If we'd rather do it more on demand too, you can just message in the Slack channel and we can, try to schedule it a little bit quicker. But if it's something that, a slight delay is okay. Just throw it in that community issue and it will just get scheduled and tweeted and whatnot. Cool. Next one. This one's kind of an interesting teaser, I would say. We've talked about super providers and a bunch of other crazy concepts in the past. Thinking about it a bit more, I thought maybe a federated provider would be a more business appropriate name for it. So I came up with like a little proof of concept of what that could look like, and it's incredibly simple, actually, as you may expect. The only challenge would be is like if all of the different like registered providers had provider hooks, there was no real clean way of dealing with that. So I basically just extract them all out and just run through all provider hooks. I'm going to just link it in the Slack channel if anyone's interested, or in the Zoom channel if anyone's interested to look at it. It's just a pull request right now. It's more of just a proof of concept to say like, yep, this is possible. But it does unlock some pretty interesting possibilities of, looking at different data sources and pulling from, the first one wins basically in this scenario. So yeah, if you have any interest or feedback, take a look and let us know. But it is kind of an interesting concept that I think we're able to prove out there. Next one is, I don't know if people have noticed, but someone from the community developed a PHP SDK that's spec compliant now. At least it should be. So we need to probably review it and test it out, but it is now available. And I think it's Composer or something like that as the PHP package manager. It should be available on there now. And so definitely test it out if you have any interest in PHP. But it's pretty cool to see someone basically from the community just read through the spec, build it basically completely themselves, and then donate it back to the project. So pretty exciting. And yeah, definitely worth checking out if you have any interest in PHP. Next one is the Python SDK. This is an area that I think, at least between Todd and I, are kind of lacking Python expertise, at least at like the enterprise level. And I think because of that, it's kind of gotten a little out of, it's the only one that's not spec compliant right now. And definitely has received probably the least amount of love from at least the team at Dynatrace. So I'm not sure if there's anyone that has interest or expertise in that area that would be willing to help, maybe
or knows anyone that would be interested.
Or exactly, we're basically looking for help maintaining that project. Otherwise we'll have to kind of keep asking around, but it's an area that it'd be great to get it spec compliant. I think it's relatively close just looking through the code, but not being a Python expert by any means. Yeah, I just want to make sure that we're in a good spot if we're going to advertise it. Otherwise, we basically just need to continue to add that that warning at the top that it's still a work in progress. Because of that, it has not been added to documentation or anything, but I do know that some work has been done on there, so I don't want to just totally discount that, but we need to make sure that it's either spec compliant or clearly marked as something that's kind of looking for maintainers.
I don't feel like to maintain it, but I'm very happy to pair with people or answer Python questions or anything like that, if that's helpful.
That would be very, very helpful. I think, yeah, because there's been a few like pull requests that's just been open for quite a while that I think hadn't really been reviewed, and like so things just kind of stalled out a bit. And yeah, I think if we can give it a little bit of love, I think it wouldn't take a ton to get over the last remaining like spec issues to get it in a good spot. So any help there would be very much appreciated. Yeah, perfect. The next one is I created a really simple Cubecon sign up form. I'll also just link that quickly in Zoom, but it's also in the notes. If you're going to be at Cubecon, please fill it out, and then I'll make sure to keep everyone in contact, and we'll try to schedule some time there. I know that there's going to be like an after hours like event thing that Dynatrace and a few others are sponsoring. So I'll make sure to, get you an invite to that. We'll also have the booth there. So if you have any interest in either stopping by the booth or helping out at the booth, that would be great. And I'm going to see if I can get a swag budget. If I can, I'll try to make sure that we can get some something kind of cool. So definitely let me know, sign up, and we'll be in contact. This doesn't help Justin, unfortunately, but I do have a Cubecon like discount code available. So if you are going to go, make sure to use that. It's 20% off. So it's, fairly significant because these tickets are kind of comically expensive for what they are. But it should be a pretty cool opportunity for us to, get together and meet. And also, if you're going to be there, just, if you're willing to share, at least let us know your schedule, so we can try to find some times to meet up and, grab lunch, or, do a OpenFeature in-person meeting again, or, there's opportunities to certainly take advantage of our time being in the same place. And that is it on Cubecon. Any thoughts on any of that? Cool. There will be a few sessions. Unfortunately, I think I've mentioned it a couple times. Mine is like Friday late, so I think most people are probably like on an airplane at that point. So you'll have to maybe review the recording. But if you do happen or haven't scheduled your travel and you wanna see this session, make sure you stick around Friday afternoon as well. Cool. Justin, looks like you're next.
Yeah. So I have I have one small thing, I guess. Who is the owner of the NuGet, the C# SDK?
It's partially me, and then Ben has also been involved.
The mailing list wants to moderate all of the communication from NuGet, and so we need to provide NuGet a special email that is skipped moderation. So I will send that.
Okay. Can I ping you about that later? I guess I'm not really sure what we want to do, but I was the one that set it up, so I must have misconfigured something.
You did it right. I'll ping you.
Perfect. Sounds good. And that does remind me, you had at one point mentioned that general groups.io mailing address, and if we wanted to get rid of it, I think this was the only place that we referenced it still. So I guess we can talk about that too when we chat through it and see what we want to do. And then it looks like you have one more topic too.
I think we talked about the mobile
stuff. The mobile stuff. Yeah, perfect. Okay. Yeah, it's one of those areas that I'm admittedly fairly weak in. If that's something that we have expertise in that area, and there's some obvious issues in the spec, now is obviously a great time to do that. And it becomes a little bit more challenging, or we have to get more creative with adding like client or mobile side, exceptions to the spec, which is something that would be, obviously pretty unfortunate if we can avoid it. Last thing that I wanted to mention, I think this is just more reiterating, I guess, would be because of our goals of trying to stabilize, especially like the developer facing sides of the SDK, if there are any like quality of life improvements that need to be made to the SDKs, I would highly encourage you to look at that and do that as soon as possible. Even if they're breaking, just kind of rip the Band-Aid off and make sure that it's clearly communicated in the release notes, but like it's going to be basically impossible to do once we mark these as 1.0. So if there's any like breaking changes that would introduce or need to be introduced in order to make it easier or more developer friendly, consider that and do it if necessary. Don't just do it for the sake of doing it, but if it makes sense and it makes the SDKs better long term, consider making those changes. There's a handful that are in the works for Node. So just be kind of watching out for that, and I'll try to communicate it and tag anyone that's been involved in that project. But just look for those, and feedback would be appreciated there. But that's the intent behind it. It's not just to introduce a bunch of breaking changes in rapid succession. It's to just get these things out of the way, so we're setting ourselves up well for the future. Perfect. That's it for topics. Does anyone else have anything?
Yeah, I have something. First, sorry for being late. I'm actually in Canada, so it's like 8:30 now, and I come directly from our daily stand-up. Actually, it's at 8, so I will practically never be on time because it's always from 8 to 8:15, and they're not gonna move it for me. So I've been trying in the past week to implement a Ruby OpenFeature implementation, mainly because we have multiple custom OpenFeature related use cases in multiple classes and libraries across the company. So apparently we have a feature flag implementation based on Redis, another one that goes into AWS parameter store, and another one that does something with the secret manager. And it's kind of a bit chaotic. And I figured, oh, there's that nice standard. And if I could come up with that, that would be nice. So I'm working on that side. But listening to you guys now in the past minutes, I figured that the Python SDK still needs some work to do. And I actually have spent past 5 years working with Python. So I guess I could actually help out there a bit.
All right, you're hired.
As far as your, oh, go ahead.
Yeah?
Sorry.
Oh, sorry, didn't want to interrupt you. It's like, what's the kind of timeline for the announcement for the Python SDK though? Because I haven't looked into it, so I don't know how close it is to the spec.
So, I mean, that's kind of up to us. I mean, the main thing that we're trying to shoot for is stabilizing the spec itself and then having, I guess our core SDKs, and we can choose what our core SDKs are. Looking through, like, I think Pete was the one that linked it, some of the Launch Darkly, like usage information, like Python is like a couple %. So it's like not something we want to totally ignore, but it's also not like the main SDK that we, absolutely need for like a 1.0 release. So I would say right now, and I think it's listed on our in our notes right now, but I would say like Java, .NET, Node, or JavaScript and Go would likely be the ones that would be like our primary. But then any of the other SDKs, like whenever it gets to the appropriate maturity level, we can go ahead and announce it and add it to documentation and things like that.
Okay, get it.
As far as your company's particular usage, though, I mean, the kind of the conundrum that you're describing of having multiple disparate feature flag systems across a company with multiple sources of truth, that's kind of exactly like one of the targets for OpenFeature, and for a lot of reasons, right? So like one is you can have a consistent kind of developer experience, but the other one is if you did get to that consistent developer experience, you could then, if you felt like it, migrate to a vendor. You can migrate to a Launch Darkly or CloudBees or Harness or whatever with lower risk. So that's like basically you've described one of the main kind of goals of the project. So all I'm saying there is if the Ruby SDK, if a Ruby SDK would really help your organization, I would not hesitate to kind of throw some weight behind that. And there has been some interest in Ruby from some people kind of related to the project already. So you might actually find that there is a like a critical mass there, at some point. Anyway, I just wanted to bring that up. Like what you described is kind of a huge use case for the project.
Yeah, I figured that. So how would I do that? Because I don't have. I
think we lost you.
The headset just switched off. It works now. Does it work?
Yep.
Yeah, great. I don't have that much kind of insight in the OpenFeature community. I basically filled out a form that I was interested to contribute, which I am. But I don't know about your guys' mailing list or anything else, any other means of communication that you guys use.
Join the Slack channel. That's the main place where we talk.
Slack channel. Okay, great.
It's for the CNCF Slack.
Yep. And then if you can add yourself as like an interested party, it's just there's a list on the community repo. If you add yourself there, then we can add you as like a member of the org, and then it's easier to like mention you in issues, things like that. And then once you're ready with Ruby too, we can talk about creating like the repos and getting all that stuff prepped.
Sounds good. Thanks.
You're welcome. All right. Yeah, and it sounds like a really interesting use case too. So I think certainly let us know, see how we can help. I mean, that is kind of like the core, problems that we're trying to help solve. So I really very interested to see you guys be successful with that.
Cool. Yeah, makes sense. I figured that OpenFeature is a good fit for exactly that problem.
Yep, that's definitely the intent. Cool. Looks like we have one new member, Jake. Welcome. Hi. If you don't mind, you mind introducing yourself quickly?
Yeah, sorry I was so late. I am an engineer at Virtru, which is a secure email and file sharing startup. And we recently did a proof of value with LaunchDarkly as a feature flag provider. We didn't have a great managed feature flag solution internally before that. And it looks like we're going to be moving forward with LaunchDarkly through the proof of value process with them. You know, many of the questions we were asking are the ones that OpenFeature is working to solve around avoiding vendor lock-in and, you know, protecting the future of feature flagging without one paid solution. So yeah, definitely interested in contributing more, working on figuring out the details internally around what that might look like. But for now, yeah, just wanted to attend a meeting and see kind of what's up. So nice to meet you all.
Yeah, great. Welcome.
Nice to meet you.
All right. Yeah, if there's nothing left on the agenda, I guess we can just go ahead and wrap up. So any last thoughts? Perfect. If you guys do have any interest in like blog posts or anything in that area, that would also be very much appreciated. I think that's an area that we're still a bit weak. We're looking at also doing some like getting started documentation. So start, you know, if you have any interest in any of those areas, that's I think a big push over the next month or so to get ready for Cubecon is making sure that the kind of the onboarding experience is seamless and easy to get started with. So
that just made me think of something. Is there any like desire to do like a little bit of a marketing push around like the 1.0, like get on some podcasts or things like that? Because it feels like it would be definitely possible to do, but it would just require, well, A, some people who are willing to be on a podcast, but then B, just organizing it, like going and sending out emails to podcast hosts and saying like, hey, would you like to do a podcast about this?
yeah, I think we should do something. I don't have any kind of specifics. So if you have any ideas, or if anyone on the call has any ideas of how we can kind of, you know, make noise around the release, I think it makes a lot of sense. I'll certainly be doing like blog posts and things like that around it. But I think, yeah, if there's any opportunities for podcasts or, you know, potential press release type things, you know, working with the CNCF, there are opportunities there. I need to figure out what we can do in the time frame. And yeah, if anyone else has any contacts or interest, yeah, help would be, I guess, appreciated on that one.
Do we have any resource? Does anyone know of like a person that we could even just talk to that would give us advice on like, you know, here's a good way to do like a marketing blitz? Like, is there like a CNCF marketing
I can ask. I mean, hopefully they don't watch this recording. So far, the CNCF has not been super responsive. Like, for example, I opened up an issue like 3 months ago to get access to their sneak stuff. And there's been no response yet. So like, it's going to be, I'll ask. I think because we're sandbox and not like incubated in anything, like it's the lowest priority, and we'll see, especially around Cubecon timeframe, may be tricky, but there are a few people that I know like internally, especially that maybe, you know, have some contacts at CNCF that we can kind of like ask them, or maybe they know other, you know, other contacts that we could basically leverage. So yeah. I'll ask around, but if anyone else, you know, has any ideas and or researchers at their company or something.
Yeah, I've done one about OpenFeature in a podcast, but it was in French. And how I did it is because I was doing a meetup before for Go Feature Flag, and some people reached me. So maybe meetups is also a way to improve our communication and to start like maybe having a presentation we can run locally on meetups. So like the word are spreading also.
Good idea. Yeah.
It could be something that we share, like we can do the presentation, all of us, and like just share it and run it in different places. Not tied to a product. I mean, like more open feature meetups.
Well, yeah, I guess. Sorry, go ahead, Pete.
I have this vague memory of when we did the initial kind of like announcement. There was, I don't know if it was someone from Dynatrace, but there was like someone who was like trying to coordinate like PR stuff with different vendors. Was that a Dynatrace person, or am I imagining that?
Yeah, there was someone here. We could maybe try to redo that. It did take a little while to do the official press release. But we could look at that again, for sure. It could even be slightly after Cubecon too, if we had to, but just around, shortly after the 1.0 release would be nice to have something officially. So I'll circle back to the people that were involved in that one and see if there's interest in redoing it. But I do think it'd be a missed opportunity if we don't do something around the 1.0 release or oh, okay. Yeah, perfect. That's good. I'll try to provide an update at the next community sync, and I'll ask around here and see if we have any like what's possible. And if you guys think of anything too, definitely let me know, and we can work through that one. And then like I mentioned, more resources on the docs I think would be helpful. I think we have a little bit there, but definitely not enough to probably be self-sufficient yet when it comes to just getting started with the tool. All right. Anything else? Perfect. I guess we can go ahead and wrap up. Feel free to review the meeting notes. And if you have anything, go ahead and add there. Join the Slack channel if you haven't already. And we'll talk to you guys soon. Thanks, everyone.
Too soon.
Thanks. Bye.